Have you thought about what actually happens when we run our games? Understanding the behind-the-scenes process of starting your games will help you read your code in the order that it will be run, which will help you organize your code, catch any problems quickly, and fix any errors faster. So we hope to save you many hours of debugging by explaining this early on. When running a game, Pico 8 follows a specific startup sequence. First, it reads your code and checks for errors. Second, it runs any code that is outside of all functions. Third, it looks for and runs a specific function to initialize or prepare the game. Fourth, it starts running the game loop and remains there, cycling between the update and draw functions. Let's go over each step in more detail. Step 1. Error checking. Before the game even begins, Pico 8 scans your code for mistakes. It specifically checks if your code breaks any hard rules in the coding language. The rules about the order of words and symbols in a language is called syntax, and so these errors are called syntax errors. If it finds something it doesn't understand, like a missing symbol or an out-of-place keyword, it stops immediately and shows a syntax error message like this. This is why you see syntax errors right away, before seeing even the first frame of your game on the screen. Step 2. Standalone code execution. Once your code passes error checking, Pico 8 then looks for and immediately runs any code that is not inside a function. This is usually just for setting variables, but as you make more advanced games, it might also be where you prepare many tables of data, or where you generate the random parts of your game, or load saved data to prepare the game where the player left off. Any code here is only run one time, which is during this startup sequence, and it will not be part of the game loop. The only way this code will get run again is if the game is fully stopped and restarted. This is a commonly overlooked part of the startup sequence, and so causes many confusions and troubles when debugging. So remember, any code floating around outside of any functions will be run only once as the first things to get run in your game. The order that it gets run is always the same order it is read, from top to bottom. If you are using code tabs, remember that your game's code is really just one text file, with each tab sitting under the previous tab. So any code outside of functions gets run in order from top to bottom through each tab. Step 3. Initialization. Initialization means to prepare something to be used. Pico 8 looks for a special function that must be named _init, which is short for initialize. This function only runs once at the very beginning of the game, but unlike standalone code, this function can be called to run whenever you want without stopping the game. It's the perfect place to set up game variables and anything else the game needs before it starts updating and drawing. For example, if you are playing chess, then the very first thing you need to do is set up all the pieces in their correct positions on the board, right? Once the board is set up, then you can start playing the actual game, where you take turns moving the pieces around. Once the game ends and you want to play again, you reset the board by putting all the pieces back to their starting positions. That would be the init function of chess, setting up or resetting the board. So the init function is used to set up most of your game's data to their starting values. Step 4. The game loop. After initialization is complete, the game enters its main loop. This loop runs continuously until the game ends. It has two main functions. Update, which handles game logic like player controls, movement, and collisions, and draw, which controls what appears on the screen. These two functions run every frame, creating the gameplay experience you see. We went over this in detail in the last lesson, so go check that out if you haven't yet. And that's basically the game's startup sequence. Understanding these steps will help you write cleaner, more organized code and prevent common mistakes. Now let's go over to Pico 8 and practice organizing our code to take advantage of the startup sequence. Alright, so the first thing we've been doing has been putting variables here, like x equals 10. And now we know that we have three main functions that get automatically run by Pico 8. Let's write them in the order that they run, But you could write these anywhere and in any order, and they will always be run in this order: init, then update, then draw. So function underscore init parentheses and end, then function underscore update parentheses and end, then function underscore draw parentheses and end. There we go. This is the skeleton of nearly every Pico 8 game out there. Now that we know that the init function is the usual place to prepare our variables, let's move this code inside of init. Now we have two places where we could organize variables. So what's the difference, and how do we know where to put which variables? The main difference is in the startup sequence of the game. Any code we write up here is outside of any function in what we call standalone code. So we could call variables we put up here standalone variables, while init holds our starting variables. Just like the starting positions of the chess pieces, this x variable could be the starting position of the player in our game. Now, if you only use the init function one time to set up all the variables and that's it, then there's really no difference between variables in init and standalone variables out here. In that case, just use one or the other, since they are both optional. If you have an init function, then just put all variables in there. And if you don't want to use the init function, then just set up your variables outside. They will get run as step 2 in the startup sequence, and without init, step 3 will get skipped, and then your game loop will run. You might see us do this when we are making very simple examples or testing out code, but for proper organization, it's best to use the init function. However, when we start making very simple games, we will often take advantage of this startup sequence by using them both. We will use the init function not just to prepare the game one time, but also whenever we want to reset the game. Let's use chess as an example again. We know we want to use the init function to set the position of all the pieces. Then the update and draw functions form the game loop where the players will move pieces until someone wins. When the player wants to replay, we can ask them in our update function, "Do you want to replay?" If yes, then we will need to reset the pieces to their starting positions on the board. And if we organize all the game variables nicely in init with their starting values, then all we have to do to reset the game is run the init function again. Easy as that. But now consider what variables you might not want to reset. Well, what if the players want to keep track of how many games they won? If we put that variable here in init and write wins equals 0, then every time we reset the board, we also reset the number of wins, and now wins will always just show as 0, so that doesn't work. This is when we can use both standalone variables and starting variables in the same game. Once we move this wins variable outside of any function, we know in the startup sequence that it will get run one time, and we will be able to update it in the game like, if the player wins, then wins plus 1. And now, if we reset the game by running the init function, the number of wins will not get reset, and it will remember the wins count through multiple rounds of chess games. Make sense? Now, it's more likely that you'll want to make a game that keeps track of some kind of score, and each attempt at playing the game, the score will reset back to 0. So we would put that in init, score equals 0. But you'll also want to keep track of a high score, and you won't want to reset that. And so instead of number of wins, this variable is more likely going to be our high score variable. Now, this will not save a high score after the player fully closes the game. Even if it did, this code would run when starting up the game and be set to 0. But this is a very simple way to remember a high score across multiple rounds of one gameplay session. Now that we have score and high score variables, let's imagine we are making a simple score chasing game. We keep track of a high score that will get run in step 2 of the sequence. Then the player's starting position and starting score will get run in the init function, which we could reset to easily. And then in the game loop, we want to update, player controls and movement, and an option to restart. And then in draw, we want to draw the player. Of course, it will need to be more complicated than that, with jumping over obstacles at least, but just imagine all that for now. It could become an endless runner like the Chrome dinosaur game, but with the player just being a red square. In fact, let's draw that. We'll want to clear the screen, and then draw the player with rectfill and our x variable. Y can just stay at something like 90, and the right side can be whatever x is plus 10 pixels, and the bottom side can be y plus 10, which is 100. And we said red, right? That's number 8. Okay, run it, and we have the player square. Now remember how we updated variables while the game is running? Inside the update function, let's just fake the player controls for now by setting the x to itself plus 1. We'll get to learning player controls and button inputs very soon, but right now we're just trying to understand the startup sequence and how we use these 3 main functions. So run it now, and the player moves to the right. Great. Next, let's add in a ground rectangle. That would be rectfill on the left side of the screen at 0, underneath our player is 101, and draw it all the way to the bottom right corner of the screen at 127, 127, and let's make it green, number 3. Let's also print the score. Run this. Cool. Now we have a simple animation happening, and you can imagine this as the starting point of a simple endless runner game. Alright, now that we have some code in all the places of the startup sequence, let's walk through it and really understand how it gets run. Step 1, error checking. There were no errors, so it ran just fine. But let's create one by removing an important keyword like this end of a function right here. So let's delete it and run this. And the error checking step caught the syntax error. It says that we have an unclosed function at line 4 in tab 0. That's an easy error to debug because we can look for which function isn't closed with an end. Let's fix that and move on to step 2, standalone code. We just have the high score variable as our only standalone code, and it's usually placed here before any other code in your game. But just to show you that you can have standalone code anywhere, we can add some more variables like here, a equals 1, and here, b equals 2, and even in a later tab, c equals 3. Let's see if this throws any errors. Nope, runs just fine. Let's pause the game and test if that extra code was actually run. While the game is paused, we can use the print function right here, like a command. Watch this. Print, parentheses, a, enter. Yep, that's 1. Print b, that's 2. Print c, and that's 3. So all 3 of those variables did get set. This is a good way to check what your variables are holding in the middle of your game, especially if something strange was happening in our game. Let's run it again and let the player run off the screen. We can pause and check where the player is currently with print x. So imagine we started the game and expected to see the player, but the player was nowhere on the screen. We can check the player variables like this and know exactly where the player is. Great for debugging. Just to show you what you'll see if it doesn't find the variable we ask it to print, let's print z. There, it shows up as nil, nothing. So this proves that the standalone code, no matter where it is in our game file, will get run during this step of the startup sequence. But now let me prove to you that the standalone code gets run before even the init function gets run. Let's delete this extra code. And right here, even after the init function, let's print the variable x plus 1. If you didn't know the startup sequence, then this would probably look fine. This prepares our variable x at 10, then this line just adds 1 to it and it should print 11. Let's run it and see what actually happens. An error. This time it isn't a syntax error, so the code is fine. It's a runtime error at line 10, which is our attempt to print x plus 1. The error message says, attempt to perform arithmetic, which just means I'm trying to do math on the variable x, which is a nil value, meaning it is holding nothing or wasn't actually created yet. So let's look at the code and see why that is true. Well, now you know the startup sequence, and so even though we set the x variable in init, that code doesn't get run before we try to do math with it down here, which is outside of any function. All right? So that shows that standalone code definitely gets run before the init function gets run. And this is a common mistake that can happen. Sometimes code you think is inside of a function gets accidentally written outside, and this error message can be really frustrating because you think the variable is set up by init before this line gets run. So be careful of standalone code, and remember that it is the first code to get run. The next step is, of course, initialization, where the init function is run. And I just want to prove to you that init will get run first no matter where it is in our game file. So let's cut this whole function, make some new tabs, and paste it way out here at the end of our file. All right, so when we run this, it still works, no problem. But let's go through the sequence of how it is run. Step 1, it reads through the code, line by line, tab by tab, looking for errors. All clear. Okay, step 2, it runs standalone code. Here's some, setting up the high score variable. Skip over all this, and that's it. So now, step 3, it goes and specifically looks for the underscore init function. Not here. Ah, there it is. So now it automatically runs the code inside of this function. Now the x and score variables are prepared. And then it goes and finds the update function and runs that. So you see, it didn't error when this update function tried to do math with x, because even though init is way at the end of our file, it was still run and the variables were prepared before running the game loop of the update and draw functions. As long as you understand this startup sequence, you can safely organize your code however you'd like. For example, we could place the update function in tab 3 and the draw function in tab 1. It's a little strange, but it still runs perfectly fine. Now, even though we could put our standalone code and functions in any order without breaking the startup sequence, an important part of writing code is organizing it in a logical and readable way. So if you use tabs, a sensible way to organize this would be to bring all the standalone code to the front, and I'd probably bring the init function to the first tab as well, so that this first tab is all the code that gets run before the game loop starts. Then the update function, which could get very long, could have its own tab in tab 1. And then the draw function can be in tab 2. This organization makes much more sense, especially now that we understand how the startup sequence works. But even I won't stick to this one example. You are free to move around your code and organize it in an infinite number of ways. As long as you understand the order that the code will be run, then you are free to write the code in whatever order makes the most sense to you. So get out there and do your best to organize your code. If you're looking for a way to practice this new knowledge, I suggest you go back to the earlier side quests and any other simple carts you've made while following our lessons, and read each one in the order of the startup sequence. Then reorganize the code by using the init function. Hopefully you'll run into some errors, and you'll have to figure out how to better organize your code to solve those errors. That's where your skills really level up and make you a great programmer. Have fun! And let's not forget, this lesson is thanks to our supporters on Ko-fi. If you want to keep us making more content like this, then make sure you subscribe. And if you can, click the link in the description to become a Ko-fi member. For more information and more resources, visit our website, nerdyteachers.com.